February 22, 1944, 29,500 feet above Gotha, Germany, Major Friedrich Weber's breath crystallized instantly in the frigid air as his Focke-Wulf 190S6 banked through the thin atmosphere. Below him, the ancient city of Gotha sprawled like a medieval tapestry, its factories now feeding the Reich's war machine. His formation of 18 fighters climbed steadily, vectored by ground control toward what should have been easy prey, American heavy bombers returning from a raid on Leipzig, now beyond the protective range of any Allied escort. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Achtung! Indianer at 11 o'clock, same altitude. Single-engine fighters with belly tanks. The radio call from Oberleutnant Klaus Reinhardt sent Weber's blood pressure spiking. Single-engine fighters. Here. Over Gotha. Nearly 700 miles from the English coast. It violated every calculation, every strategic assessment, every defensive doctrine the Luftwaffe had constructed since 1940. Weber squinted against the crystalline sunlight reflecting off the cloud layer below. Their silver glints resolving into sleek, predatory shapes. Not the familiar twin-boomed P-38 Lightnings that occasionally penetrated this far. Not the stubby P-47 Thunderbolts whose maximum range terminated somewhere over the Ruhr Valley. These were different. Longer fuselages. Distinctive bubble canopies catching the sun. Square-tipped wings. And those unmistakable teardrop shapes slung beneath each wing, auxiliary fuel tanks that should not exist, could not exist, on a single-engine fighter capable of combat at this altitude, this deep into Germany. Impossible, Weber whispered into his oxygen mask. But the Americans diving toward his formation were very, very real. For 3 years, the Luftwaffe's entire defensive strategy had rested on a foundation of mathematics as solid as the physics of flight itself. Range equals fuel capacity divided by consumption rate. Combat radius equals half of maximum range, accounting for reserve fuel and combat loads. These were immutable laws, as reliable as gravity. General der Jagdflieger Gerhard Schreiber, commanding the Reich's fighter defenses from his headquarters in Berlin-Wannsee, had built his entire doctrine around these calculations. The numbers were clear, verified by Luftwaffe technical intelligence, confirmed by captured Allied documents, validated by 3 years of combat experience. The American P-47 Thunderbolt, powered by its massive Pratt & Whitney R-2800 radial engine, could escort bombers to a maximum combat radius of 230 miles from English bases. With external tanks, the metal drop tanks that degraded its performance so severely, perhaps 290 miles on a perfect day with favorable winds. That gave the Americans the Ruhr Valley, Cologne, maybe Kassel if they were willing to accept catastrophic losses. The twin-engine Lockheed P-38 Lightning, with its distinctive twin-boom configuration, could reach perhaps 350 miles with its internal fuel. With drop tanks and careful fuel management, perhaps, it might scratch 420 miles. That meant Hanover, Brunswick on the extreme edge. But not Leipzig. Never Leipzig. And certainly not Gotha, Erfurt, or any target approaching Berlin. Schreiber had written in a December 1943 memorandum to Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, the Americans face an insurmountable problem of physics. To escort their bombers to Berlin requires a single-engine fighter with a combat radius exceeding 650 miles. Our calculations demonstrate conclusively that such an aircraft cannot be built within the constraints of current technology. A fighter carrying sufficient fuel would be too heavy to climb, too sluggish to maneuver, too vulnerable to engage. The laws of aerodynamics are not negotiable, Herr Reichsmarschall. Central and Eastern Germany remain a sanctuary where our fighters can operate without interference. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Göring had circulated Schreiber's memo to all Luftwaffe commands with a personal note: any pilot reporting American single-engine fighters beyond Hanover is suffering from combat fatigue and should be relieved of duty for medical evaluation. The memo had been issued on January 15, 1944. On January 29, 1944, Hauptmann Stefan Vogel of Jägerschwader III encountered unidentified single-engine fighters near Magdeburg, 410 miles from the English coast. His combat report, filed in triplicate according to regulations, described aircraft resembling the North American Mustang but carrying what appeared to be oversized fuel tanks, engaging at 27,000 feet with performance characteristics inconsistent with previous intelligence assessments. The report was stamped unverified, probable misidentification, and Vogel was ordered to report to Luftwaffe Medical Services for psychiatric evaluation. He flew 6 more missions before being killed on March 2, 1944, shot down by a P-51 Mustang near Schweinfurt. On February 3, 1944, Oberleutnant Ernst Becker of JG-11 reported American single-engine fighters, type uncertain, over Braunschweig at high altitude, extremely aggressive, broke off engagement only after 20 minutes of combat. Braunschweig lay 380 miles from England. The report was filed and ignored. On February 10, multiple pilots from 3 different Geschwader reported encountering long-range American fighters over targets in central Germany. All were ordered to amend their reports to read P-38 Lightning or face disciplinary action for spreading defeatist rumors. By mid-February 1944, the Luftwaffe High Command had created an institutional blindness so complete that field commanders stopped filing accurate reports. Better to write what Berlin wanted to hear than face court-martial for telling the truth. Major Friedrich Weber knew the official doctrine. He had received the memorandums, read the technical assessments, attended the briefings. American single-engine fighters could not reach Gotha. The mathematics proved it. The High Command had declared it. Therefore, what his eyes showed him diving from 30,000 feet with drop tanks separating cleanly from their wings could not be real. But his survival instinct, honed through 4 years of combat across 3 fronts, overrode doctrine. All aircraft, drop tanks, and engage. Stay in pairs, watch your 6. The radio discipline collapsed instantly into a chaos of warnings, curses, and panicked calls as 18 German fighters tried to meet an enemy that shouldn't exist. Oberleutnant Klaus Reinhardt had 47 kills painted on the rudder of his Focke-Wulf 190. He was 24 years old, a veteran of the Eastern Front, and he had never felt fear like the ice that gripped his chest as the American fighters fell on his formation. They came from above and ahead, using the sun brilliantly. Classical bounce tactics, but executed with a precision and aggression that spoke of pilots who weren't worried about fuel, weren't concerned about making it home, weren't flying at the ragged edge of their range where every minute of combat burned fuel they couldn't spare. Reinhardt's snap rolled right as tracers laced through the space his aircraft had occupied a heartbeat before. The American, he caught a glimpse of the distinctive invasion stripes, the bubble canopy, the sleek lines so different from the angular brutality of German fighters, didn't try to turn with him. Instead, the Mustang zoom climbed vertically, using energy and power that shouldn't be available to a fighter that had flown 700 miles from England. They're playing with us, Reinhardt realized with growing horror. These weren't desperate pilots trying to survive an engagement at the extreme edge of their endurance. These were predators with fuel to burn, altitude to spare, and the confidence that came from knowing they owned this sky. He reversed his turn, diving for cloud cover, and keyed his radio. Weber. These aren't the Americans we fought last year. They have full combat performance this deep. How is that possible? Weber didn't answer. He was fighting for his life against 2 Mustangs that worked together with practiced efficiency, one forcing him into predictable maneuvers while the second positioned for the killing shot. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, 4 Focke-Wulf 190s were falling in flames toward the German countryside. 2 more limped home with battle damage that would keep them grounded for weeks. Not a single American fighter had been shot down. Major Weber's aircraft bore 37 bullet holes. His wingman, Feldwebel Hans Zimmermann, age 19, with 6 weeks of operational experience, had died in his first encounter with a Mustang. His parachute had deployed, but American fighters had circled the silk canopy, not shooting, just circling, making sure the German pilot saw them, understood that they could have killed him but chose mercy, before waggling their wings and turning west toward England. That night, in the officers' mess at Jüterbog Airfield, Weber tried to explain what he'd experienced to men who hadn't been there. "They shouldn't have been there at all," he said quietly, staring at the schnapps in his glass. "According to every calculation we have, every assessment from Berlin, it's aerodynamically impossible. But they were there. And they fought like they'd just taken off from an airfield around the corner, not like they'd flown 700 miles through hostile airspace." Hauptmann Dieter Hoffmann, the Geschwader's technical officer who'd spent the war analyzing Allied aircraft from crash sites and captured documents, shook his head. "The numbers don't work, Friedrich. A single-engine fighter simply cannot carry enough fuel to reach Gotha and maintain combat performance. The weight penalty would be catastrophic. We've studied this problem ourselves for years. It cannot be done." "Then we're being attacked by ghosts," Weber replied. "Because I saw them. I fought them. And Zimmermann is dead because of aircraft that you say cannot exist." The room fell silent. The mathematics said it was impossible. The official doctrine said it was impossible. But 5 pilots sat in that room with the memory of American fighters over Gotha burned into their minds, and mathematics couldn't change what they'd seen. The combat reports from February 22 arrived on General Schreiber's desk on February 23, 1944. He read them 3 times, his face darkening with each pass. "This is impossible," he said to his aide, Major Otto Brandt. "Weber is an experienced officer. 41 kills. Oak leaves to the Knight's Cross. He should know better than to file fantastical reports." Her general, Weber's account is corroborated by 7 other pilots independently. All describe the same aircraft, single-engine, American markings, operating with full combat capability over Gotha. Then they're all mistaken. Schreiber slammed his fist on the desk. Or they encountered P-38s and misidentified them in the heat of combat. Or this is some kind of mass delusion. What they are not describing is single-engine fighters 700 miles from England, because such aircraft do not exist. Brandt chose his next words carefully. "Sir, I've reviewed the engineering calculations. There is a theoretical possibility. If the Americans developed extremely lightweight auxiliary fuel tanks, perhaps paper or pressed fiber construction, and if they accepted severe performance degradation during the cruise phase while carrying these tanks, they could potentially extend range significantly. Theoretical possibilities don't win wars, Brandt. Engineering realities do. Show me wreckage. Show me a captured pilot. Show me a dropped tank. Until then, I will not entertain fantasies that undermine our entire defensive strategy." Her general, "We did recover dropped tank fragments near Magdeburg 2 weeks ago. The preliminary analysis suggests paper plastic laminate construction, extremely light, designed to be disposable. Which could be from a P-38. The size was inconsistent with P-38 specifications, sir." Schreiber stood abruptly, pacing to the window of his office. Outside, Berlin bustled with the routine of war, military vehicles, civilians queuing for rations, searchlights being tested for the inevitable night raids by the RAF. Everything appeared normal, ordered, under control. "Listen to me carefully, Otto. If what these pilots claim is true, then our entire defensive doctrine is obsolete. If American fighters can escort to Berlin, then there is no safe airspace in Germany. No sanctuary for our fighters to regroup. No protected zone where we can train new pilots. Do you understand the implications?" "Yes, Her General." "So we will not accept this report as fact until we have irrefutable proof. Amend Weber's combat report to read engagement with P-38 Lightning aircraft. Note that combat fatigue may be affecting pilot judgment. Recommend 2 weeks of administrative duty." "Sir, Weber will protest. His men saw what combat stress and oxygen deprivation caused them to see. This discussion is over." The amended reports went to Göring's headquarters that afternoon. The Reichsmarschall, hosting a lavish dinner at Karen Hall for visiting industrialists, glanced at them between courses and scrawled in the margin, "Obvious misidentification. Discipline commanders who cannot maintain proper combat reporting standards." neither Schreiber nor Göring wanted to believe. To believe meant to acknowledge that the war in the air had fundamentally changed, that the Americans had achieved what German engineering had declared impossible, that the vast industrial power of the United States could produce not just numbers but innovation. Denial was comfortable. Denial preserved the existing order. Denial meant they didn't have to report to Hitler that American fighters could now reach anywhere in Germany with impunity. So they denied. And the Mustangs kept coming. While Luftwaffe High Command was denying reality, their technical intelligence officers were piecing together a picture that should have terrified Berlin. Hauptmann Hoffmann, the technical officer who'd argued with Weber, was not a fool. After that conversation in the officers' mess, he'd returned to his cramped office and pulled every file related to the North American P-51 Mustang. The aircraft had first appeared in small numbers in late 1943, initially dismissed by Luftwaffe intelligence as another American fighter, adequate performance, nothing exceptional. The early models, powered by Allison engines, had indeed been unremarkable, good at low altitude, mediocre above 20,000 feet where modern air combat occurred. But reports from December 1943 onward described something different. A Mustang variant, designated B or C models, equipped with a different engine. British Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, but manufactured under license by the American Packard Company. Hoffmann had examined a crashed P-51B near Ostersleben in January. What he'd found had troubled him then. Now, after Weber's combat report, it terrified him. The engine installation was a masterpiece. The two-stage, two-speed supercharger maintained power output to altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet. The intercooling system was more sophisticated than anything in the Daimler-Benz DB605 that powered the Bf-109. But most remarkably, every component was machined to tolerances that German factories, increasingly reliant on slave labor and disrupted by bombing, could no longer consistently achieve. The Americans were building precision aircraft on automobile assembly lines at a rate of over 300 per month. And they were doing it with workers who weren't starving, weren't being bombed, weren't living in terror of the Gestapo. But the engine alone didn't explain 700-mile range. That mystery had partially unraveled when Hoffmann examined the drop tank fragments recovered near Magdeburg. Pressed paper. Layers of kraft paper impregnated with synthetic resin, shaped in dies, cured under heat and pressure. The resulting tank weighed less than 40 pounds empty but could hold 108 gallons of fuel. It was disposable, cheap, and so light that when jettisoned it barely affected the aircraft's performance. German auxiliary tanks were stamped aluminum, reusable, expensive, and they weighed 95 pounds empty. A Bf-109 carrying German drop tanks was sluggish, vulnerable, unable to fight effectively. A Mustang carrying American drop tanks could cruise to Berlin, jettison the tanks in seconds, and fight with full performance using only its internal fuel. Hoffmann did the mathematics. P-51B internal fuel, 184 gallons. Two 108-gallon drop tanks, 216 gallons. Total fuel load, 400 gallons. Cruise consumption at optimal altitude and mixture, 65 gallons per hour. Flight time, 6.15 hours. Combat radius at cruise speed of 280 miles per hour, approximately 650 miles with 30 minutes of combat reserves. Berlin lay 580 miles from East Anglian airfields. Well within range. He typed his report with shaking hands, dated February 24, 1944, and titled it, Assessment of P-51B Mustang Long-Range Capability, Urgent. His conclusions were stark. The P-51B Mustang, when equipped with two 108-gallon drop tanks, possesses sufficient range to escort American heavy bombers to any target in Germany. The combination of the Packard Merlin engine's high-altitude performance and the lightweight auxiliary fuel tanks represents a revolutionary advance in fighter design. The aircraft can cruise efficiently to extreme range, jettison external tanks upon encountering resistance, and fight with performance equal or superior to our best fighters. Our previous assessments were based on the assumption that external fuel tanks would significantly degrade combat performance. The American approach, ultra-lightweight disposable tanks, circumvents this limitation entirely. This is not incremental improvement. This is a paradigm shift in air warfare. Recommendation: all previous doctrine assuming sanctuary airspace beyond escort range must be immediately revised. Defense planning must assume American single-engine fighter escort to Berlin and beyond. Failure to adapt to this new reality will result in catastrophic losses. The report was sent up the chain of command on February 25. It was returned to Hoffman on February 27 with a single-sentence annotation from General Schreiber. Your speculation is not supported by operational reality. Focus on documenting verified enemy aircraft capabilities. Hoffman placed the rejected report in his personal files, where it would be discovered by American intelligence officers in May 1945, a testament to institutional blindness that refused to see what was coming. The encounters didn't stop. They multiplied. February 24, JG-1 reported engagements with long-range fighters over Halberstadt. 3 Bf-109s lost. February 25, JG-300 engaged American single-engine fighters of unknown type near Merseburg. 2 FW-190s destroyed, 4 damaged. February 29, multiple Geschwader reported widespread fighter escort over targets throughout central Germany. One pilot, Lieutenant Martin Bauer, managed to damage a Mustang badly enough that it crashed near Jena. The wreckage was examined immediately. The aircraft was indeed a P-51B. Serial number 43 to 12434. Manufactured by North American Aviation in Inglewood, California. The cockpit placards were in English. The pilot, First Lieutenant Robert J. Harrison of the 354th Fighter Group, had bailed out safely and was now a prisoner. Harrison was interrogated by Luftwaffe intelligence at Dulag Luft, the interrogation center for captured Allied airmen. He was 23 years old, from Ohio, had 380 hours total flight time, and he was completely open about his aircraft's capabilities. "Sure, we can reach Berlin," he told his interrogator, Hauptmann Erich Stein. "That's the whole point. Fly out on drop tanks, drop them when we see you guys, fight on internal fuel, plenty left to get home. It's not even hard. We've been doing it for weeks." "How many hours of flight training did you receive before combat?" Stein asked. "About 400 hours total. 50 in the Mustang specifically, plus gunnery training, formation flying, navigation, all that." Stein's report landed on General Schreiber's desk on March 2. The general read it, then summoned Stein personally to Berlin. "This American is exaggerating. Trying to damage morale." "Sir, he was quite forthcoming. Actually seemed proud of the aircraft. He confirmed range capabilities consistent with Hauptmann Hoffmann's analysis. One prisoner's claims prove nothing. He could have been briefed to spread disinformation. He seemed genuinely confused that we didn't already know all this, sir. He said it's been in American newspapers for months." Schreiber leaned back in his chair, silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost contemplative. "Do you know what happens if I tell the Reichsmarshal that American fighters can now escort to Berlin? He will demand to know why our intelligence failed to predict this. He will demand to know why our engineers didn't develop equivalent capability. He will look for scapegoats, and people will be shot. Not just demoted or reassigned, shot. And then he will have to tell the Führer that the Americans have achieved what we said was impossible. But sir, if it's true, truth is less important than maintaining operational confidence. The pilots are already nervous. If we admit that nowhere in Germany is safe from American fighters, morale will collapse entirely. So we maintain that these are isolated incidents, misidentifications, anomalies. We give our people hope. False hope, sir. Hope nonetheless." Stein left the meeting understanding that truth had become a casualty of institutional self-preservation. The High Command would rather maintain comfortable lies than confront uncomfortable reality. But reality doesn't care about institutional preferences. And reality, in the form of hundreds of P-51 Mustangs, was about to make denial impossible. By early March 1944, the pattern was undeniable to anyone willing to see it. American heavy bomber formations were penetrating deeper into Germany with increasingly aggressive fighter escort. The escorts were staying longer, fighting harder, and inflicting casualties that the Luftwaffe could not sustain. Major Friedrich Weber, back in the cockpit after his mandated rest, flew missions almost daily. Each one reinforced his understanding that the war in the air had fundamentally changed. On March 4, escorting Sturmgruppe assault fighters making a desperate attack on B-17s near Magdeburg, he watched American Mustangs tear through the heavily armored FW-190s like wolves through sheep. The Sturmgruppe concept, armored fighters boring straight through escort screens to reach bombers at point-blank range, had worked briefly in February. Now, with Mustangs present in numbers, it was suicide. Of 12 Sturmgruppe aircraft launched, 9 were shot down. The surviving 3 were so badly damaged they crash-landed at friendly fields. Not a single bomber was destroyed. That evening, Weber sat in his quarters writing a letter to his wife, Anna, in Stuttgart. He couldn't tell her operational details, censorship forbade it, but he wrote around the truth as best he could. My dearest Anna, the fighting has changed in ways I cannot fully explain. We face opponents now who seem to have unlimited resources, unlimited fuel, unlimited confidence. The calculations that once governed our lives no longer apply. I think often of our conversations about mathematics, about how numbers provide certainty in an uncertain world. But what happens when the numbers change? When the equations we relied upon are suddenly solved differently by someone we never expected to be so capable? The young men I fly with are brave beyond words, but bravery alone cannot overcome fundamental disadvantages. I fear the difficult times we discussed may be arriving sooner than we hoped. He sealed the letter, knowing the military censors would read it, hoping they'd let it pass. 3 days later, Anna would receive it in Stuttgart. For days after that, Stuttgart would be bombed by American B-17s escorted all the way from England by P-51 Mustangs. Anna would survive in the cellar of their apartment building, but the building itself would be destroyed. The letter would be found in the rubble, smoke-stained but intact, a small artifact of the transformation overtaking Germany. Weber never learned the letter's fate. On March 6, 1944, he would have his own reckoning with the reality of American long-range fighters. And this time, the encounter would strip away the last vestiges of denial. March 6, 1944, 0847 hours, Jüterbog Airfield, Major Friedrich Weber pulled his flight gloves tight as he walked toward his Focke-Wulf 196. The morning air bit through his leather jacket despite the weak sunshine struggling through overcast skies. Around him, mechanics made final preparations on 14 fighters being readied for what ground control promised would be a target-rich environment, American bombers returning from hitting aircraft factories at Erkner, just outside Berlin itself. Berlin. The Americans had bombed Berlin. Not a feint, not a diversionary raid, but a deliberate assault on the capital of the Reich with 672 heavy bombers. And according to the preliminary reports filtering through from Luftwaffe fighter control, those bombers had been escorted the entire way by single-engine fighters. Weber's crew chief, Feldwebel Otto Grumman, a veteran mechanic who'd kept aircraft flying since Poland in 1939, helped him into the cockpit. Fuel is full, sir. Ammunition is loaded. She's ready. The world's changed, Otto, Weber said quietly as he settled into the familiar seat. Those calculations we relied on, they don't mean what we thought they meant. Grumman's weathered face showed understanding beyond his formal education. My father fought in the last war, sir. He told me that when the Americans entered in 17, they brought so many men and so much material that the numbers stopped making sense. He said fighting them wasn't like fighting French or British. It was like fighting an ocean. You could kill waves of them, and more waves just kept coming. Weber checked his instruments, adjusted his oxygen mask. Did he survive? He did, sir. But he said the moment he knew Germany would lose was when he saw how many Americans there were, how well fed they looked, how new all their equipment was. He said they looked like they were fighting a different war than we were, one where supplies weren't scarce and replacements were unlimited. Engines are starting now, Otto. See you when I get back. God willing, sir. The formation took off at 0915 hours, climbing through broken cloud cover toward their patrol altitude of 28,000 feet. Weber led his swarm, 4 aircraft in 2 pairs, with Lieutenant Paul Richter as his wingman. Oberleutnant Klaus Reinhardt led the second element. The radio crackled with vectors from ground control. Nighthawk leader, bandits at grid reference Gustav Otto 4, altitude Angels 27, heading west. Multiple formations. Engage at your discretion. Acknowledged. All aircraft, drop tanks now, prepare to engage. The formations of bombers appeared first, box formations of B-17 flying fortresses, their contrails stark white against the gray sky. Weber counted quickly. 48 bombers in this formation alone. Intelligence briefings said the Americans had launched over 600. The arithmetic was staggering. Then he saw the escorts. Not the twin-engine P-38s, not the short-range P-47s turning back after expending their fuel. These were Mustangs, dozens of them, weaving protective patterns above and around the bomber stream like sheepdogs guarding their flock. All aircraft, attack the bombers from head-on. Avoid engagement with fighters if possible. But avoiding the Mustangs was no longer possible. They had been waiting. 6 P-51s dove from 32,000 feet, bouncing Weber's formation with textbook precision. The lead Mustang, Weber glimpsed Kentucky Colonel painted on the nose, fired a 2-second burst that stitched holes across his left wing. He snap-rolled right, diving, trying to use his aircraft's superior roll rate, but the Mustang stayed with him effortlessly. Brake right. Brake right. Reinhardt's voice, high with adrenaline. Weber pulled into a climbing spiral, the Focke-Wulf's radial engine screaming at full power. The Mustang matched him climb for climb. Worse, it was gaining. At 29,000 feet, the American fighter's supercharged Merlin engine was producing more power than Weber's BMW 801, and the performance gap was obvious. He rolled inverted and dove, heading for the cloud deck at 15,000 feet. The Mustang followed. Tracers walked past his canopy, not a concentrated burst, but patient, measured shooting from a pilot who knew he had fuel and altitude to spare, who could take his time. Weber jinked left, then right, varying his altitude in a desperate defensive weave. His radio was chaos, pilots calling for help, warning of attacks, reporting kills, screaming as their aircraft were hit. At 12,000 feet, he entered the clouds and immediately pulled a hard reversal, changing heading 180 degrees. Standard evasive tactics, taught to every fighter pilot. He burst out of the cloud layer at 11,500 feet, scanning frantically for his pursuer. The Mustang was there, 200 meters to his right and slightly above, having anticipated the maneuver perfectly. The American pilot waggled his wings, a gesture that in the strange language of aerial combat meant I could have killed you but chose not to. Then the Mustang rolled away and climbed back toward the bombers, leaving Weber alone in the sky with a damaged aircraft and the bitter taste of complete tactical defeat. The combat reports from March 6 told a story that Luftwaffe High Command could no longer ignore. 23 German fighters lost. 41 more damaged, many beyond economical repair. Against this, American losses were 11 bombers and 3 fighters, a loss rate the Americans could sustain indefinitely while the Luftwaffe could not. But the raw numbers masked something more profound, the complete psychological dominance of the American escorts. German pilots were no longer fighting at the edge of their capabilities against opponents barely clinging to enough fuel to get home. They were fighting against an opponent operating with full combat effectiveness 700 miles from their bases, with fuel reserves that allowed extended combat, multiple engagements, and even, as several pilots reported with disbelief, strafing attacks on German airfields on the return flight. Hauptmann Dieter Hoffmann compiled the statistics with the grim precision of an accountant tallying a bankrupt ledger. Luftwaffe fighter losses February-March 1944. February, 187 fighters destroyed, 198 damaged. First week of March, 94 fighters destroyed, 116 damaged. Projected loss rate if March continued, 450-plus fighters destroyed in a single month. Pilot casualties. February, 127 pilots killed or missing, 89 wounded. First week of March, 58 pilots killed or missing, 41 wounded. Pilot replacement rate, 45 new pilots per month, average 85 hours flight time. Pilot loss rate, projected 200+ per month. The mathematics were unsustainable. Germany was training pilots in 3 months who faced opponents with 8 months of training. German fighters were being shot down faster than factories could replace them. And every mission flown consumed aviation fuel that refineries could not produce quickly enough to replenish. On March 8, Hoffmann presented his analysis to General Schreiber in a private briefing. Herr General, at current attrition rates, the Luftwaffe fighter force will cease to exist as an effective entity within 6 months. Schreiber stared at the charts, the graphs, the irrefutable numbers. Your projections assume continuation of current trends. Current trends are accelerating, sir. Each week, American fighter range extends deeper. Each week, their pilots become more aggressive. Each week, we lose more experienced pilots and replace them with novices who survive an average of 7 missions. What do you recommend? Hoffmann chose his words carefully. We need a fundamental reassessment of defensive doctrine. The sanctuary concept, that Central Germany was beyond fighter escort range, is dead. We must assume American fighters everywhere. This means we cannot mass formations beyond escort range. We cannot train pilots in safe airspace because there's no safe airspace. We cannot position fighters to strike unescorted bombers because there are no unescorted bombers anymore. So we've already lost. Not lost, sir. But we're fighting a different war than the one our doctrine was designed for. We need new tactics, new aircraft, new training methods. And we need them immediately. Schreiber was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who'd seen the future and found it unbearable. I will present your analysis to the Reichsmarschall. But understand, Hoffmann, telling Göring that American fighters can reach anywhere in Germany is telling him that we failed. That our calculations were wrong, our intelligence was flawed, our engineering was surpassed. He will not receive this well. The alternative is continuing to send pilots to their deaths based on obsolete doctrine, sir. Sometimes, Hauptmann, there are no good alternatives. Lieutenant Martin Bauer was 20 years old. He had 97 hours total flight time when he joined Jagerschwader 11 on March 15, 1944. His training had been compressed from the peacetime standard of 250 hours to less than 100 because fuel shortages and accelerating pilot losses meant the Luftwaffe could no longer afford lengthy training programs. On his third combat mission, March 22, 1944, he encountered P-51 Mustangs over Gotha. His combat report, filed posthumously from the account of his wingman, Feldwebel Ernst Koch, described what happened. We were vectored to intercept bomber formation at 27,000 feet. Lieutenant Bauer was flying my wing, position correct, maintaining formation well. As we approached the bombers from astern, American fighters dove on us from above. I called brake and turned hard right. Bauer attempted to follow but his turn was too tight, he stalled and entered a spin. I called for him to recover but received no response. His aircraft descended through 20,000 feet still spinning. I observed his canopy separate at approximately 12,000 feet but saw no parachute. Aircraft impacted ground near Mulhausen. Time from initial contact to impact, approximately 90 seconds. Martin Bauer had never practiced spin recovery at altitude. Fuel shortages had eliminated advanced aerobatic training from the curriculum. He had never engaged in mock combat with an experienced opponent. He had never been taught how to recognize and counter the bounce tactics American fighters now employed routinely. He had been given a fighter aircraft representing years of engineering development and sent into combat against opponents who had every advantage, better training, superior numbers, longer range, and the initiative that came from knowing they owned the sky. He died because he didn't know how to recover from a spin, a basic flying skill that peacetime training had once spent weeks perfecting. Feldwebel Koch survived that mission. He was killed 2 weeks later on April 8, 1944, in an encounter with Mustangs near Leipzig. He had 186 hours of flight time and 14 combat missions. He was 22 years old. These stories repeated with numbing frequency across every Jesuiter in the Luftwaffe. The experienced pilots who'd fought in Poland, France, Britain, and Russia were dying faster than their skills could be passed to replacements. And the replacements were arriving with training so abbreviated that survival itself was unlikely. Hauptmann Stefan Vogel, who'd been dismissed as suffering combat fatigue for reporting Mustangs over Magdeburg in January, had survived into April purely through caution bordering on cowardice. He no longer attacked unless holding every possible advantage. He disengaged immediately when Mustangs appeared. He refused to lead novice pilots because watching them die had become unbearable. In his diary, seized by American forces after the war, he wrote on April 15, 1944. "They send me boys. Not pilots, boys." Yesterday's replacement was 18 years old with 92 hours total flight time. He asked me how to arm his guns. He didn't know how to arm his guns and they sent him to combat. I tried to teach him in the 30 minutes before the scramble order came. He was shot down on his first mission. I don't even remember his name. There are too many names to remember anymore. By late April 1944, the Luftwaffe's fighter force existed in a state of permanent crisis. Every metric of organizational health was in decline. Operational readiness. January 1944, 68% of fighters operational. April 1944, 47% of fighters operational. Decline due to parts shortages, maintenance personnel quality drop, increasing combat damage, fuel rationing affecting test flights. Pilot quality. Average flight hours of operational pilots. January 1944, 156 hours. April 1944, 118 hours. Experienced pilots, 200 plus hours, as percentage of total. January 1944, 41%. April 1944, 23%. Mission effectiveness. Bomber kills per 100 fighter sorties. January 1944, 4.2. April 1944, 1.8. German fighter losses per 100 sorties. January 1944, 3.1. April 1944, 6.7. The death spiral was self-reinforcing. Fewer experienced pilots meant less effective training for novices. Higher loss rates meant fuel had to be conserved, reducing training time further. More damaged aircraft meant overworked maintenance crews made mistakes, reducing operational readiness. Lower operational readiness meant fewer fighters could intercept each raid, increasing the burden on those that did launch. And over all of it, every day, American bombers came with their Mustang escorts, reaching targets that had been untouchable 6 months earlier. The synthetic fuel plants that produced 87-octane aviation gasoline for Luftwaffe fighters became priority targets. On May 12, 1944, the plant at Luna, which produced 25% of Germany's aviation fuel, was devastated by precision bombing. Escorted by Mustangs all the way from England, the bombers put 1,200 tons of high-explosive and incendiary bombs on target with unprecedented accuracy. Production at Luna dropped 90% overnight. Repairs would take months. And before those repairs could be completed, the bombers would return, escorted again by Mustangs that could reach anywhere in Germany. The fuel crisis cascaded through the entire Luftwaffe system. Training flights reduced from 4 per week to 1 per week. New pilots reporting to operational units with 60 hours total time. Combat formations grounded for lack of fuel. Fighter units unable to intercept raids because fuel allocation exhausted. Hauptmann Hoffmann compiled the fuel statistics with the same grim precision he'd applied to casualty reports. Aviation fuel production. January 1944, 164,000 tons. May 1944, 52,000 tons. Projected June 1944, 28,000 tons. Minimum monthly requirement for current operations: 120,000 tons. The mathematics were inexorable. By summer 1944, the Luftwaffe would lack the fuel to fight even if it had the pilots and aircraft. Behind the statistics were human beings, mostly very young men who'd grown up in the Hitler Youth, who'd been told they were defending civilization against barbarism, who believed in their cause with the fierce certainty of youth. Oberleutnant Klaus Reinhardt, who'd survived the February 22 encounter over Gotha, continued flying missions through March and April. His survival was increasingly miraculous, increasingly improbable. On April 29, 1944, his luck ran out. Leading a swarm intercepting bombers near Magdeburg, he encountered a formation of 16 P-51s from the 357th Fighter Group. The engagement lasted 7 minutes. Reinhardt shot down one Mustang, his 48th and final victory, before being bounced by 2 others working in coordinated pairs. His wingman, Lieutenant Franz Weber, no relation to Major Friedrich Weber, described it. Reinhardt called that he'd gotten one, climbing away from his kill. 2 Mustangs came from above, one forcing him into a defensive turn while the second positioned for deflection shot. Reinhardt was good, he reversed and got some hits on the second Mustang. But there were too many of them. A third came in from his blind spot during the reversal. I saw the hits walk up his fuselage. His canopy shattered. The aircraft rolled inverted and went down. I never saw a shoot. Klaus Reinhardt was 24 years old. He'd survived 178 combat missions on the Eastern Front and 87th on the Western Front. He held the Knight's Cross with oak leaves. He'd been one of the most skilled fighter pilots in the Luftwaffe. And he'd been killed in a routine engagement by American pilots with a fraction of his experience simply because they had numbers, coordination, and fuel to prosecute the fight to its conclusion. His death was one of thousands. Each one represented years of training, combat experience, and institutional knowledge that could not be replaced. Major Friedrich Weber survived April and May and June. He survived through caution, through luck, through an almost supernatural ability to sense danger before it materialized. But survival as a fighter pilot in 1944 Germany carried its own cost. In a letter to his wife dated June 14, 1944, 8 days after the Allied invasion of Normandy, he wrote, "My dearest Anna, I no longer recognize the war I'm fighting. Every morning I brief young men who look at me as if I hold the secrets of survival. I do not. I survive through caution that borders on cowardice and through watching better pilots than I die while I run away. Yesterday we lost 3 aircraft to a single American formation. The Americans fought like they were training, precise and patient, while our pilots fought with the desperation of men who know each mission might be their last. This cannot continue. Mathematics does not lie, and the mathematics now are merciless. I think often of our home in Stuttgart, of the garden you wrote about trying to maintain. Hold that image for both of us. If I return, it will be to that garden, not to this sky that has become a charnel house." The letter arrived in Stuttgart on June 23. Anna had already evacuated to her parents' home in Bavaria after the June 20 bombing raid that destroyed what remained of their neighborhood. By summer 1944, the transformation was complete. The Luftwaffe that had terrified Europe in 1940, that had seemed invincible over Britain and unstoppable over Russia, had been reduced to a defensive force barely capable of contesting the skies over its own territory. The statistics told the story with brutal clarity. Luftwaffe Fighter Force status, June 1944. Operational fighters, 1,089, down from 1,847 in January. Pilots available, 876, down from 1,654 in January. Average pilot experience, 94 hours, down from 156 in January. Fuel available, 34% of requirement. Operational readiness, 41%. American Fighter Force status, June 1944. P-51 Mustangs in theater, 1,278. Operational rate, 73%. Average pilot experience, 287 hours. Fuel availability, unlimited. The appearance of Mustangs 700 miles into Germany had triggered a cascade that destroyed not just aircraft and pilots but the entire system that sustained German air power. Training pipelines collapsed. Fuel production cratered. Experienced pilots died. Quality declined. Morale evaporated. General Schreiber's final report to Göring, dated June 30, 1944, was discovered in captured German archives after the war. It represented a complete reversal from his earlier denial. The appearance of American long-range fighters has created a situation from which there is no military solution with available resources. We are losing pilots faster than we can train them, aircraft faster than we can build them, and fuel faster than we can produce it. The Americans can strike any target at any time with escort coverage. We cannot prevent this. We can only die trying. Our earlier calculations were correct given the assumptions we made. But the Americans changed the assumptions. They developed capabilities we believed impossible and deployed them in numbers we cannot match. This is not a failure of German courage or skill. It is a failure of industrial capacity and strategic foresight. Recommendation: all remaining fighter resources should be husbanded for defense of critical targets only. Mass formations against escorted bomber streams result in unsustainable losses. We must accept that we can no longer control German airspace. Göring rejected the report and relieved Schreiber of command. His replacement, General Dietrich Peltz, was ordered to maintain offensive operations regardless of cost. The cost was catastrophic. In July 1944, the Luftwaffe lost 1,243 fighters, more than its entire operational inventory at the start of the month. Replacement production delivered 687 new aircraft. Pilot losses exceeded 600. Replacement training graduated 203 new pilots. The mathematics of annihilation were complete. Major Friedrich Weber survived the war. On April 24, 1945, with fuel exhausted, ammunition gone, and the Third Reich in its final death throes, he landed his Focke-Wulf 190 at a civilian airfield near Munich and walked away from the aircraft that had been his home for 4 years. American forces captured the airfield 3 days later. Weber, in civilian clothes, was identified as a Luftwaffe officer and sent to a POW camp where he spent 6 months before repatriation. In 1954, he attended a reunion of former Luftwaffe pilots in Stuttgart. Among the guests were American fighter pilots who'd fought over Germany. Weber found himself face-to-face with Colonel Robert Harding, who'd flown P-51s with the 357th Fighter Group. They spoke haltingly at first, then with growing warmth. Harding had shot down 7 German fighters. Weber had survived encounters with Mustangs 23 times. They discovered they'd been in the same airspace on March 6, 1944, the day Weber had been forced to flee from Kentucky. Colonel, "Your aircraft changed everything," Weber told him. "Not just the tactical situation, but our understanding of what was possible. We'd calculated it was impossible to escort fighters to Berlin. You proved us wrong." Harding nodded. "We had advantages you didn't. Industrial capacity, fuel, numbers. But you had pilots who fought with incredible skill under impossible conditions. If our positions had been reversed." "They weren't reversed," Weber interrupted gently. "You were fighting for liberation. We were fighting for a criminal regime. The Mustangs over Germany didn't just defeat us militarily. They helped defeat an evil that needed to be defeated." In 1961, Weber was among the first former Luftwaffe officers to join the new West German Air Force, now allied with the United States and NATO. He rose to command a fighter wing equipped with American F-104 starfighters. In 1975, at age 58, he retired with the rank of Brigadier General. At his retirement ceremony, Colonel Harding, now a retired USAF general, was present as guest of honor. 31 years ago, Weber said in his speech, American fighters appeared over Germany and shattered everything we thought we knew about air warfare. We believed our homeland was beyond their reach. We were wrong. But that defeat, as painful as it was, liberated us from something worse than military failure. It freed us from the lies we'd been told and the evil we'd served. Today I retire from an air force allied with the nation whose fighters I once fled from. My closest colleagues include men who fought against me. This transformation, from enemy to ally, from defeat to partnership, is possible only because the Mustangs that appeared over Germany brought not just destruction but eventually freedom. To those who flew them, and to those who died fighting them, we owe more than military history can capture. We owe the chance to build something better from the ruins of what was destroyed. The room, filled with German and American officers who'd once fought against each other, rose in standing ovation. The appearance of P-51 Mustangs 700 miles into Germany represented more than a tactical or strategic victory. It marked the moment when American industrial and technological power reached its full expression in World War II. The lessons learned over Germany shaped post-war air doctrine worldwide. Range equals strategic freedom. Air forces invested heavily in aerial refueling, long-range strike aircraft, and carrier-based power projection. Industrial capacity wins extended wars. The ability to produce thousands of excellent aircraft proved more valuable than small numbers of exceptional aircraft. Pilot quality depends on training time. No amount of bravery or tactical skill compensates for inadequate training hours. Adaptability beats rigidity. The Americans continuously improved tactics, technology, and training. The Germans couldn't adapt quickly enough. Truth is more valuable than comfortable lies. The Luftwaffe's denial about Mustang capabilities cost them critical months when adaptation might have been possible. Modern air forces study the 1944 air war over Germany not just as history but as case study in how technological advantage, properly exploited, creates cascading strategic effects. The shock that German pilots felt when American fighters appeared 700 miles into the Reich, appearing where they couldn't be, fighting with capabilities that shouldn't exist, disrupting every calculation that governed life and death, represented the future arriving ahead of schedule. For the Luftwaffe, it was the beginning of the end. For American air power, it was validation of strategic vision married to industrial might. For the millions suffering under Nazi tyranny, it was visible proof that liberation was coming. And for Major Friedrich Weber, standing in the winter sunshine of 1944 watching contrails streak across German skies, it was the moment he understood that his side had already lost, that the Americans had achieved the impossible, and that everything he'd been told was a lie. The Mustangs over Germany didn't just win a war. They shattered a worldview and helped build a better one from the pieces. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.